The forged world of Morad was a place of hierarchies. The Adeptus Mechanicus liked their domains that way. Every wheel of society gradated with 1,000 carefully measured teeth, every individual set into a precisely safe socket. Not that the socket was cut to fit, of course. I'm immoral, and if you didn't fit in, then so it was below. There were many tasks that were too menial for the actual clergy themselves, too pedestrian for their cybernetic Skitarii warriors, yet too demanding for the bluntly direct minds of their robots. Under Fabricator General Berzellum, this went double. He was, he proudly declaimed, a cerebral man. He needed meaner creatures to attend to his every need, to scrub the floors of platinum lucidium until they gleamed, to repair the fine delicacies his artificial tongue surely could not appreciate, to bow and scrape of his. Davian knew all this. It is why they led her into the Palladium. She was young, her biological eyes still keen, her hands still steady. She had none of the shakes, the squints, the defects that latched on to most of Morad's populace before they cleared a quarter of a century. She ran messages between the lowest tiers of overseers, the most trivial of the tech priest's direct servants. She served as a courier for their passive aggression of 1,000 interdepartmental feuds. On rarer occasions, she was called out to use her keen eyes and hands to touch up paint on walls, paint on robots, paint on the sacred symbols of the Adeptus Mechanicus imperial power. Berzellum insisted that every corridor and hall his august form swayed through was immaculate, so that the perfection could not inclimate a similar precision with it. The scuff of her sandals could be heard on almost any part of Lucidium, save for the cells and the senior priest's private chambers, where loftier and more augmented servants held sway. Davian's place, therefore, was at the very base of the hierarchy, so low as to be beneath the notice of the priesthood themselves. She was supposed to be grateful that she had even the meager place in that world. But the priest's hierarchy was not the only one. As above, so below. And Davian was a creature of many parts. She came from manufactorum and mining people, the workers who thronged the tunnels and camps of Murad, and whom the tech priests crammed into the city of Octorites, to be used up and cast away in their factories and their experiments. Her home was beneath the poorest, most congested tenements of South Chasm District, where succeeding generations had carved out warrens of tunnels and cell-like rooms to escape the overcrowding above, until the earth was a honeycomb of lightless dwellings. The poorest of the poor lived there, shoulder to shoulder, leaving only to risk limbs and health amidst the machines of the manufactoria. 100,000 people dwelled in the dark beneath the South Chasm tenements, and amongst them were Davian's clan, hiding their deformities in a special blessing beneath the mutations and the of the rest. Everything on Murad was toxic. I don't know much about Adrian Chakovsky, other than his name sounds Slavic, and the last Slavic book that I really tried reading was November 1914, November 1916. And that was difficult. That was a difficult read. I didn't finish it, but it's because there were so many perspectives. There was just so many perspectives there, and I find with a vast generalization that the Slavs do enjoy. Um, they enjoy a vast dramatis personae, or perhaps I'm thinking of something that is no longer that way. But I'm glad that the standard template construct of a Black Library novel kind of keeps that in check and keeps the number of characters at a bearable dozen. There's a dozen characters in this book tops. Very 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 manageable, but you lose something in the process, and but without all those different characters, you run the risk of not writing a character but just rewriting an archetype. uh there's a couple archetypes in this book. Actually, I think Brazilian is really the one I can just put my finger on. Everything on Murad was toxic. The only variable was whether it killed you tomorrow or over the course of 40 years. Unless you were a tech priest with half your organs replaced by machines, you were never going to get old. The work crews were constantly trying to scavenge or cobble together protective gear just to steal a few more years of life and service from the jaws of the void. The priests didn't like that, though. They said it slowed the work, compromised efficiency, and the Omnissiah loved efficiency above all things. Davian had seen the murals, soot-stained and grimy, on the walls of every manufactorum. The chain of workers, hand in hand, like an industrial process, until they tumbled into the great furnace, marker and maid melting together into the flames, and all still smiling. And so, even as she played out her role as the least cog in the Mechanicus machine, she stole secrets and knowledge to bring to her people, warnings of raids, locations of caches. But that didn't end the hierarchies for Davian. The poor clave she lived in, the warren beneath the ruinous leaning tenements, was the heart of something that the tech priests had never even guessed at. Even now, she was hiding there, darting out of the Palatium by one of the old side locks most of the priests didn't realize was still working. She had to shuffle her feet too. Too long to hear the news she'd been waiting for. The news her extended family was desperate for. And the news was bad. Sakiri had failed. She had failed to kill the fabricator general and had been stopped. She had been caught. She, who had put a bullet in the heads of a dozen brutal overseers, executed the worst factor managers and tithe extortioners. She, who had killed the Scutari Rangers, who had come sniffing about Davian's home ground when they sent in trouble, and had left no trace of their bodies. And now the priest's Ascension Day was looming large in the future. And it was to have been their rallying cry, the sacred banner lifted at last. The time when they would lead the oppressed to Murad into the streets. A desperate plan. A plan born of hope and prophecy. If you were one of the true faithful, if you believed as Davian believed, with all her substance, that one day this misery would be transformed into joy. But their champion, their hero, had failed. She had crept her way into the fabricator general's presence, but some misstep had hauled the bloated tyrant out of her aim at the last moment. Bozellum still lived, and Zakiri had been caught. And the news had been bottled up between the senior tech priests for far too long, as the blemishes on Bozellum's hide were repaired, and a fresh polish was applied to the great dome of his body. She'd only gotten out words hours after the fact, long after she should have been home with her family. Because Ascension Day was looming and the conscription pool was out on the streets, taking its due from the abused people of Octorites. The districts closest to the Platium Lucidium, wealthy and favored, had little to fear. The squads and machines of the pool would already be spreading outwards, heading for the poor tenements like her own. Close to the palace, there was only a keen anticipation for the festivities to come. In the Docahedral Plaza, before the main doors, a crowd had gathered in their fine clothes, all that red and white, black and gold, to hear a sermon. Davian ducked about the outside of it, the preacher's seronious words rolling over her head. She had been 6 years old when she'd understood that there were crucial differences between the church services she attended in the subterranean chapel of her home and those of the ministerium. Not that her family weren't religious. They were, if anything, far more devout than this braying crowd, chanting the approved catechism back with mechanical precision. Davian had been raised to believe. With a fierce burning fire she felt within her, like a physical thing. When the preacher spoke about the promises of the emperor, something tugged within her mind, and she knew it to be true. Her faith would be impressed an inquisitor, if only it had been faith in the same thing. I guess the Dynasty of the Cult it's really just one of the funnier factions. It really is. Chaos is definitely one of the funniest. Like Chaos Demons is one of the funniest. And then Chaos Traders, and then the Dynasty. I guess there's just a measure of I guess it takes that relatability, but also that corruption. So maybe it's a double dose of relatability. There were at one point, I don't know if these were actually models made or if this was just some horror experiment by the heavy metal team or whoever did the old shit, but there were Chaos Genestealer hybrid cults. And I'm not sure if the cult turned to Chaos or if it was a Chaos cult that turned Dynasty. I'm not sure. I don't know if I don't know if the distinction matters, but that I guess it alludes to a time, because I can look past the silliness of the limousines, because that was their signature vehicle. This it was basically the size of a shoe. It appears to be. It was just like 3 or 4 slabs of metal that you glued together, and it was a limousine with 2 machine guns in the front of it. And this, I don't think with everything put into play that there was literally a limousine there. You know, I'm double thinking here or whatever, you know, with the new hammer or the mid hammer that I dabble in. But it goes to show, right, that there's a reason. There's the guy. There's an infrastructure. There's there. At one point in time, the Genestealer cult was envisioned as being a faction with roots, like that would grow, like there would be an army. I'm not exactly sure how they reconciled meeting the Tyranids. I'm not sure exactly how that went. Maybe they just didn't meet them. Maybe it just, the vast gulf of space was such that meeting them didn't even happen. So that's a possibility. But that when this faction was initially conceived, I believe that they were more or less like the other factions. They were just out on a space adventure. Choose your own flavor of going out on a space adventure. And yeah, the genestealer cults have always been sort of even even with the new hammer. I like the way they operate. They just pop out of nowhere and throw bombs at people. It's simple and it works. They called themselves the Congregation of the Divine Union. Long ago, the sect had been a family affair. Mine workers, manufactorum hands, brandishing together for strength against the world, and administratum that was trying steadily to kill them, banding together under a promise of better times ahead. The workers had sought hope. The preachers, with their new creed, had sought converts. Between the anvil of the poisonous world and the hammer of the taskmasters, something new had been forged that the tech priests had never guessed at. These truths were self-evident to Davian. Taught to her from infancy, yes, but more than that, she knew that the Emperor loved her. No deviance from standard text there. That the stars were the Emperor's angels, looking down from the heavens and judging his servants. And where the creed crept from the shadow of orthodoxy started here. That a time would come when those angels would descend to Murad and reward the faithful, transforming them into something divine and beautiful. A time that was always coming, a beacon of hope for the weary and the oppressed. Because the emperor was for the people, not just the great lords in their palaces. The emperor sought union with all. The chapel beneath Davian's home tenement had a sculpture of the emperor on the wall, looking down benevolently upon the faithful. It had been carved over generations with mining tools stolen from the works. To show that he valued each and every one of them, the sculptors had given it many arms. To show that he knew the privations of Murad, the emperor's head had been depicted, and the peculiarly elongated shape so many of Davian's older relatives displayed. The aunts and uncles who kept out of sight in the deeper chambers and in the windowless rooms. That was her emperor. When she'd finally seen the bland representations in other chapels, she'd been shocked. A nondescript enthroned form, almost faceless, so generic in the artist's attempt to stand in for all humanity that the end result had been distant and inhuman as a robot. What was that compared to their own place of worship? The welcome of all those reaching hands, the warmth of that so wide smile. That was where they had learned their faith. Davian and her brother Neem. Thoughts of Neem spurred her on. She hopped on a transport car and rode its single rail halfway towards the poor districts that lined the chasm of Octorti's southern spur, then jumped off as it slowed down for the Nilidium Factorum depot, pelting through the streets that were already swirling with anxious people. And too late already. She saw the red of the Scutari ahead, a squad of 20 of their vanguard. They were going house to house with their census, taking their due. The conscription pool had arrived. 2 heavy wagons half blocked the road, their beds just cages, 3/4 full already. In one, she saw only children, from babes ripped from their mother's arms to the baffled, squalling youngsters of 7 or 8, conscripts for the imperial armies, to be made into Scutari themselves, their ailing flesh replaced by metal, their wills replaced by enforced obedience. And there were older conscripts, men and women on the cusp of adulthood, and already bent and scarred from life on Morad, pinned up to be thrown into the great meat grinder that was the Astra Militarum. The blood that watered the fields of imperial victory, as the bitter saying went. In a cycle of precisely monitored yet never quite mapped into Murad's grinding year, Ascension Day had come around again, and the poor districts of the city were being gutted to fill quota. The other wagon held a grab bag of people from all walks. She saw some of the congregation there. Too late for her to help. Alongside them were workers who'd been mauled by the Factoria, but hadn't died. Miners with lost limbs. Children born of mutated or deformed or to poisoned mothers. Those judged not fit to work, who had now been judged not fit to live. They wouldn't be going to fight the Emperor's wars. They'd be part of the Ascension Day celebrations instead. Wails split the air. He's me only son. You can't have him. You're not allowed. Please, like every other thing on Murad. The conscription pool worked to strict regulations. They were taken to the surplus. That was the theory. But Davian could hear the amplified tones of the Vanguard, Alpha, telling the woman that she was listed as having 3 children, so could spare the Omnissiah's glorious service just one. They died, she shrieked. They died in your factories. You can't take my only son. Records show you failed to completely complete the appropriate notifications of demise, the Alpha told her, and then turned away, heedless of her rage, as his followers hauled the man out. By then, Davian was past the crowd and already running. She had almost been one of those conscripts. Back years ago, almost before she could remember, the conscription pool had come calling. There had been playmates gone the next morning, dim faces missing from her life, a sense of absence like a missing tooth. And those absences weren't so unusual. Life on Murad was dangerous. A cave-in or industrial accident could wipe out a generation. An eruption of gas, a misfiring machine, perhaps a new seam of radioactive ore that the tech priest would divert them to mine. Death, just not incidental, but as a weighed and calculated, almost attached to the desired outcome. The people of Murad were a resource, just like the minerals in the ground, to be harvested for the greater glory of the Omnissiah. But alas, the conscription pool cut deeper. The young and fit who were taken went to serve in the wars of an emperor who was fighting not to celebrate, who was the figure not celebrated in their religious rites. The children and babes went to become faceless cyborgs, just like the Scutari, even now reaping their harvest from the poor districts. Davian had grown up in a world marked by such absences. Soon enough, she felt it was just her and Neem. And now Neem was sick, just like so many of the workers fell sick. Sick, but getting stronger. Not just better, as in recovering, but better. Dr. Tesling had been tending to Neem, changing him so that he could be robust enough to conquer the toxins and the organ damage that life on Murad had gifted to him. But the process was only part complete, and Neem wouldn't be able to run when the pool came knocking. In one clave, the workers were in open revolt, trying to hold the conscription pool off. It wasn't somewhere the congregation was strong. If it had been, then probably they wouldn't have risen up. Not that the congregation preached obedience to the tech priests, but the creed was always to await the right time. Hearing the merciless crackle of Scutari guns, watching the tall bird-like shapes of the Sidonian dragoons stilt amongst the rising flames, she knew the rioters would achieve nothing if only security had succeeded. With the fabricator general dead, the Mechanicus hierarchy might contract into itself. A full-scale uprising could have been a chance. But now the tech priests were reunited in their purpose. They were harvesting the people of Octorites. She needed to get to Neem, but like a plague. When Neem fell sick, she'd taken him to Dr. Tiesling, just like everyone else did. The tech priests would spare no medicine for workers, but at least the congregation had tried. Tiesling's medicine was half study of stolen books and half revealed knowledge passed down from the elders, but he gave the faithful whatever treatment he could. His trim, white-coated figure could often be seen doing the rounds of his clinic. Davian and Neem were a particular concern of his. He'd brought the pair of them up since several epidemics had raced through the close-packed tenements of the South Chasm, treated mortifying flesh wounds, and now he was working with Neem. Dr. Tiesling was there as a hidden strength in Neem. The organic and the inorganic, he'd explained in his customary cheery manner. Our masters would tell you that the inorganic is always to be preferred, but sometimes we can turn the tables. Sometimes it is the flesh that can rise to the occasion. And Neem's flesh had been shifting and changing, different each time she visited the clinic. If Dr. Tesling's back room laboratory, strapped to a table so he couldn't injure himself or others, Neem had been going through transformations. He would live, Dr. Tesling promised her, but he would have to be prepared to be reported as dead to the census. He wouldn't be able to go outside freely in sunlight. Not until the blessed day of revolution, the elders assured everyone was coming. And that hopeful thought buoyed her almost all the way to her home tenement, that one day soon, in her lifetime, in her near future even, the congregation would lead the beaten and oppressed people of Murad in a crusade of their own. They would scourge the powerful from their palaces and tear them piece from mechanical piece. The Emperor's angels would see them and their faith in purity and descend to consummate the blessed union. And then she was inside of the tenement, and the Scutari were already breaking their way in, hauling out her neighbors and her friends, and the squad was delving further, a great, hungry machine, tearing up the plascrete to get into the spaces beneath, exposing it all to Murad's baleful sun. She saw the cramped rooms of her family and kin unearthed by its metal jaws, and then a grander space beyond. They were pouring down into Dr. Tesling's clinic, trampling the beds of the sick and the injured to get inside.